Well, good evening and welcome back to Wednesday Night Live, August 20th, 2014. I am your host and narrator, if you will, and award-winning host, I might say, of the beautiful Pink Brick Award given to me by the LGBT community here in beautiful Pocatello. And I keep that as a reminder of their tolerance, acceptance, and love. So thank you very much. We are coming to you from Pocatello, Idaho in the beautiful Portneuf Valley, gateway to the great Northwest. And we hope you will tune in every week at this time, 8:30 on your, well, on your YouTube probably. Let me start off the show as I always do by reminding you about Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center. 478-HOPE. Very easy. 208 is the area code for the whole state of Idaho. If you can help a young mother who perhaps was not expecting the baby she's having, or perhaps is expecting a baby out of wedlock, or maybe needs to adopt out a child but needs your help, please call 478-HOPE. They are the only people in this area outside of the churches, those who are involved, who give any hope to mothers rather than planning for the parenthood. So if you can help them, now they operate on a shoestring. They don't get millions of dollars from the government. They need your help. You can call them and ask them how you could help them financially, or you can do something simple by buying diapers for them, or baby wipes or other things that infants can use and very small children can use. And you know, I think I shared with you a couple of weeks ago, I went to Costco to do some shopping and picked up some diapers for Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center. And I was talking with a young couple that had 2 children, because I was kind of sharing with them that I had no idea of what an expense baby diapers are. In my day, we washed them out and reused them. Today, of course, they're disposable. And this young couple certainly knew how to explain to me how difficult it is to add this luxury, if you will, into the budget. So give Compassion and Hope, 478-HOPE, a call. See what you can do to help them. You'll be glad you did. They'll be glad you did. And who knows, you may save the life of an infant. All right, well, let's get right to our program tonight. We've got some catching up to do. We're going to try to hit on some current topics. We, of course, if you've been watching the news at all, and I must confess to you that I watch most of my news from Fox Television, so I get a more moderate slant. They're certainly not what you'd call conservative, but they're more moderate. CNN, it's astonishing the way CNN, MSNBC, the way they have been spinning this whole thing in Ferguson, Missouri. And I just thought there's a very well-written article, I'm going to share it with you in a little while, by an author who I don't usually cite, and that's Juan Williams from, he is on Fox News as a regular contributor. He is the liberal progressive. I don't know if I'd call him a leftist, but he certainly is a liberal progressive. And but for once, Juan and I are kind of in sync on almost everything in this article. Very well written, as you might expect from Juan. But before we get there, let's catch up on a couple of other things. Now, it's very interesting. You know, we just came out of this huge fight with the homosexual community here in Pocatello, and it's a fight that's going on nationally. It's nothing here. And I say fight in the literary sense, if you wish, where we've been combating ideologies. I, of course, am opposed to the so-called non-discrimination ordinance that was shoved down our throats here by our city council, actually by one city councilman, Steve Brown, it might as well be Smith, Steve Brown, who had the deciding vote and rammed this down our throats. And of course, the Fair Pocatello, so-called Fair Pocatello, have their point of view, and they have many spokesmen in the public arena. There are only a few on this side of that issue, my being one of them. But I came across an article that I thought was kind of interesting, and this is not to relive the bad experience of this whole Proposition 1 thing. Rather, it's to keep some context for it, to keep some context only because a fellow named Clegg decided to, Trent Clegg I think it is, I've got the article here, he decided to beat up on a fellow named George Swenson, who George Swenson is a local writer, and I'll read his column to you. And you'll see perhaps why I decided to read this article to you, which is on that point. And that's only because I'm going to go chronologically starting, this is August the 7th, and I'm going to bring you up to the 20th, which of course is today's date. And this is an article from Alliance Defending Freedom, August 7th, 2014. This is by a fellow named Joseph LaRue, who is legal counsel for Alliance Defending Freedom. European High Court says no right to same-sex marriage. What does this mean for us? As the debate over the definition of marriage rages across the states, the European Court of Human Rights, kind of like a Supreme Court of Europe, has decided that the European Convention on Human Rights, kind of like our Constitution, does not require that nations recognize same-sex marriage. Well, why is this important, or why is it noteworthy? Well, we just had that big battle in Boise with the Add the Words people, who are determined to put their definition of marriage and their definition of family on the books and make us all accept it, whether we like it or not. So this has some bearing on that. This is a monumental decision and could have a major impact, as our Supreme Court is expected to take up a marriage case in the coming term. Our Supreme Court justices have looked to this court before, the International Court. In fact, Justice Kennedy relied upon the European Court of Human Rights when deciding the Lawrence case that ruled the ban on sodomy unconstitutional. Now, here are the facts. Man marries woman. Man decides he's a female. Man has a sexual reassignment surgery to become female. Man tries to change his legal status to female. Finland has law restricting marriage to one man, one woman unions, such as we have here in Idaho. Finland declines to change man's legal status unless man and woman agree to dissolve their marriage and enter domestic partnership. I know, it's a little convoluted. You can't fool Mother Nature. Remember that old commercial? Man and woman do not want to do that, arguing that divorce is against their religion. And this, when I read that, I almost fell off the chair. Wait a minute. This guy wants to be a woman. He has had his sexual assignment changed. I'm assuming that means he's had the surgery that goes along with the assignment. And and now he says that this other thing is against his religion. Hello? Anybody home in there? Sir? Ma'am? Man and woman do not want to do that, arguing that divorce is against their religion and their children would be disadvantaged. They're really advantaged having dad become mom or mommy or associate mom or assistant mom, whatever they would decide to do, having lesser status than they do as the children of a married couple. This is in Finland. Man and woman therefore demand to have man's legal status changed to female while leaving man and woman in a marriage, even though Finland does not recognize marriages between two females. And you kind of, your head rattles, you say, wait a minute, what happened? Who's on first? The court held by a 14-3 vote that the European Convention on Human Rights does not require countries to recognize same-sex marriages. The court affirmed an earlier decision that there is no right for same-sex marriage. This would be comparable to SCOTUS issuing an opinion that says, we meant what we said in our case from 1972, Baker versus Nelson, that there's no equal protection problem if states choose not to recognize same-sex marriage. They didn't have to recognize same-sex marriage in 1972, and they still don't. One reason the European Court said it reached its decision has to do with the fact that there was no European consensus regarding same-sex marriage. 10 countries recognize it, 37 do not. The court concluded that it would be better to let the debate continue than to impose a one-size-fits-all solution on all 47 countries in Europe. Not surprisingly, this groundbreaking decision from Europe has escaped the notice of mainstream media. However, you can read more about it in Lifelight News, Catholic Family and Human Rights Institute, and Breitbart. Now, what does this mean for the U.S.? It remains to be seen. However, this decision supports our argument, that's the Alliance Defending Freedom organization, that same-sex marriage is not a fundamental right. It would therefore be good for our courts to do as the European Court did. Our courts should let the debate continue and not try to impose a 50-state solution on the American people. And then they ask you to take action. It says, help us spread the news of this win by sharing this post with your friends and family, and get your questions about same-sex marriage answered. So that was from Alliance Defending Freedom, August 7th, 2014. Can you fathom what this whole mess would do to those children? You know, I was watching, I was doing some research. I'm kind of slowly learning how to use the internet and use Google to find things and all that. And I came across tons of sites that support same-sex relationships and calling them marriage and families. And they have these kids, most of them are prepubescent, some early teens, who are defending their mommy plus mommy and their daddy plus daddy. Well, what else would they do? Are they going to renounce their parents because they're in a homosexual relationship? So the kids are being brainwashed to accept this as the norm, and there's no way my heart couldn't go out to those children and realize, you know, what they have to deal with by trying to support their two mommies or their two daddies and make it seem normal to the other 97.5% of humanity that does not accept it as normal. It was heart-wrenching to look at these children and see what they were trying to do. All right, this is from August 8, and this was in the Idaho State Journal. It was on it's either the Saturday or Sunday where they have the full columns, and this was written by George Swenson. Now, I know George Swenson. George Swenson worked on the campaign for the Vote Yes Pocatello. He's a good man and a family man, and he writes a pretty good letter, so let me share this with you. What does Prop 1 mean for Pocatello? By George Swenson. Well, the election is over, but should Pocatellans just move on? Looking at the results, Proposition 1 lost by about 70 votes. Actually, I just got the official letter from the Attorney General's office. Proposition lost by 56 votes. And I remind you of that because you remember on election night, the Fair Pocatello people were elated because they had 147 votes ahead, and by 2 o'clock the next morning it had dropped to 80. We challenged it in the elections office, and it dropped to 56. And if you aren't astonished and alarmed by that happening in your election office, then perhaps we should just throw the whole election thing out and just let people do what they want. So, so Proposition lost by about 56 votes out of nearly 9,000 votes cast. Now, actually, there were 10,200 votes cast. So that's, I'm not quibbling with it, but I want to put this in context. That comes to less than 1%, and that's true. Yes, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, but further analysis shows voters on election day significantly in favor, 4,199 to 3,680, a 521 vote margin. Remember, that was in favor of Vote Yes Pocatello. Absentee voters voted no by 1,200 over 522, over 2 to 1 against. The easiest way to enter a fraudulent vote is by absentee ballots, which with significantly fewer safeguards on the early voting process. And again, if you're not alarmed by that, you should be, because the absentee vote has been used for years as a way to decide elections, and there has been so much independent studies found that showed fraud here and there on this, but nothing that was ever carried to a full term so that it could be brought to a court of law, because it takes money. And quite frankly, those who are against the non-discrimination ordinance simply don't have the money. Those who are for it have tons of money. They spent $156,000 to defeat the Proposition 1, Vote Yes Proposition 1. Also, the Yes group spent about $11,000, while the No's spent about $155,000, mainly from out-of-state sources, and that's very true. Almost a 15 to 1 ratio. They were able to squeak by with 56 votes says that Pocatello is not necessarily in favor of the ordinance. The election was bought by out-of-state interests. So what was really at stake? Last June, a member of the City Council, Steve Brown, for reasons known only to himself, voted contrary to his known principles for an ordinance which will have significant negative impacts on this town. Extreme? Take a look at the most egregious part of the ordinance. In the public accommodation portion, it states, Section B, enjoyment of accommodations, etc., to unlawfully deny or discriminate against any person because of sexual orientation and or gender identity expression, the full enjoyment of any of the accommodations, advantages, facilities, or privileges of any place of public resort, accommodation, assemblage, or amusement. What does it mean by full enjoyment? In the definitions section, where the city council, the city tries to explain this, full enjoyment of shall be construed to include but not be limited to the right to use, rent, or purchase real property, any service, commodity, or article of personal property offered or sold by any person or establishment to the public, and the admission of any person to accommodations, advantages, facilities, or privileges of any place of public resort, accommodation, assemblage, or amusement, without acts directly or indirectly causing persons of any particular sexual orientation and or gender identity expression to be treated as not welcome, accepted, desired, or solicited. In other words, if you're a renter and you think that this might not be a good idea, shut your mouth. You can't think. This doesn't just affect business owners who don't want to participate in a gay celebration. This affects anyone. For example, a member of the public at Ross Park who expresses disapproval of a gay couple engaging in public display of affection, PDA, could be subject to prosecution. You can tell a straight couple showing PDA to take it elsewhere, but you could face a misdemeanor and 6 months in jail for saying the exact same words to a gay couple. Another example, a neighbor is having a garage sale. A gay couple arrives and does the PDA thing. The homeowner asks them to leave. An accomplice captures the exchange on a cell phone. The homeowner faces jail time and fines or an Orwellian-style re-education session. Nice way to legally harass those you consider your enemies. This gives the LGBT community incredible power to force acceptance of their lifestyle. Because no other segment of the population enjoys this type of legal recourse, it constitutes special rights and is a clear violation of the 14th Amendment. It also criminalizes freedom of speech, religion, and association in violation of the First Amendment of the Constitution. The fact that nearly 5,000 Pocatelloans voted to keep this ordinance bothers me, but it is understandable given the enormous war chest the gay activists had and the resulting misleading campaign. But the fact that thousands who would, by their principles, have voted to repeal it but never made it to the polls concerns me more. I attribute this to two factors. First, this election had incredibly negative campaigns which caused lower voter turnout. The prime perpetrator was Mike Simpson, who bombarded every Republican with the nastiest ads against an opponent I've ever seen. Now, he's kind of mixing apples and oranges here, but do you remember the campaign Simpson versus Smith? Yeah, Smith. Nasty. Millions of dollars worth of nasty. We never expected to see something like this from Mike Simpson. It is a blight on his name and a discredit to his office. But because the whole tenor of things was so corrupted by Simpson's negative campaign, George Swenson kind of lumps that into what happened to the rest of the electorate. And I suppose there's a nexus there. The other is the fear that church-going folks have of the P word. We tend to forget that politics is the public expression of private morals. And if people of faith stay out of politics, whose morals are expressed? This is clearly a moral issue, and church leadership should have expressed that fact and encouraged church members to exercise their civic duty to vote. As a result, we are stuck with a very bad and divisive ordinance which never should have seen the light of day in the first place. I sincerely hope that the current City Council will have the courage to heavily modify the ordinance to remove all criminal penalties, remove the public accommodation section entirely, modify the other sections to more closely resemble the Salt Lake City ordinance, and review how legislation such as this was ever permitted to see the light of day. Perhaps the makeup of the various commissioners or commissions should be looked at for balance in a very diverse community. And then it tells a little bit about George Swenson, a retired computer professional. He's originally from California. After making yearly visits to Idaho for about 20 years to visit family, he finally moved here, making Pocatello his home in 2006. In California, he was president of the Silicon Valley Taxpayers Association, was involved in the California Republican Assembly, the Golden State Second Amendment Committee, and various other conservative groups. He identifies himself as a constitutionalist, putting principle over party. And with the exception of the factual numbers that I corrected, George makes a good case and writes a good letter. Now, Why, besides the obvious, do I share that with you? Well, I wasn't going to share that with you until I saw this nasty gram from Trent Clegg. Now, Trent Clegg is the significant other of Chris Cole, sometimes known as Chris Stevens, sometimes known as Chris Stevens Cole. He's the on-camera reporter on Channel 8, hates and despises me, and gets every chance he gets, he does some sort of a dig on me, and that's okay. He can report however he wants to. But so Trent Clegg is his significant other, and apparently Trent Clegg takes umbrage with the letter from George Swenson. So on now, George Swenson's letter was written August the 8th. On August the 14th, the Idaho State Journal published this this letter in the Your Letters section of the newspaper. LGBT ordinance. George Swenson's recent Sunday editorial regarding Pocatello's non-discrimination ordinance poked the hornet's nest yet again, hoping to see if there were any hornets left to anger. Ostensibly dedicated to Christianity, he doesn't seem to be interested in fostering any kind of peace. Instead, his diatribe questions the integrity of many people involved in the election and the intelligence of anyone who voted for the ordinance. Election officials and volunteers, Councilman Steve Brown and Mike Simpson, are all targeted, but this editorial can easily be seen for what it is: a pouty and carelessly accusatory cluster of sour grapes proffered by a petulant individual who didn't get his way. The one assertion he makes that merits any real response is that the ordinance creates a specially protected class of people in violation of the Constitution, specifically in regard to use of public accommodations. This tired argument has been made time and again ever since the ordinance was proposed, and is just as erroneous now as it was then. All people of whatever sexual orientation or gender are protected by this ordinance. Now I interrupt myself to say, huh? This is specifically designed, written, and supported by the LGBT community to give the LGBT community so-called protections from the rest of us because we are so intolerant, so hateful, so homophobic that they can't live in this community. Forget the fact that, well, this fellow Trent Clegg, he works for the library. He has a good government job. Sure, it pays well. He has a good job. His significant other, Chris Cole, he's a newsman or reporter on Channel 8 News. He has a good job. Anybody throwing stones at them? No. I suspect that they have some love nest someplace where they live that they're able to, you know, maybe one of them owns a home and they live together. I don't know. But this whole ordinance was supposed to protect folks like this from folks like you and me. And yet he has the chutzpah, I guess. All people of whatever sexual orientation or gender are protected by this ordinance. I'm sorry, I missed the point there, Mr. Clegg. It makes no sense. It doesn't protect me. From what? From whom? To address Mr. Swenson's specific example of the alleged inequality created by the ordinance, whether at a public park or a garage sale, all people are welcome as long as they conduct themselves within the legal code. And this is a cute way of doing this. Public displays of affection, PDAs, straight or gay, tasteful or not, and 97.5% of us would probably say they are never tasteful, gay or straight, but certainly not gay. Two men swapping spit does not appeal to most of us, nor do two women appeal to most of us. Tasteful or not are currently legal as long as no genitalia is displayed. Perhaps if Mr. Swenson is so worried about these PDAs, he should spend more time trying to change the law than to ban them all. Good luck with that. Well, that's exactly what the Proposition 1 was all about, to try to repeal this onerous and, I believe, constitutionally illegal law. How long are we going to have to endure the, I guess it's supposed to be garrulous ranting of those who didn't get their way in what was a heavily scrutinized, protracted, but ultimately legal process? And why is it that transplanted Californians are the ones crying the loudest? And this is Trent Clegg of Pocatello. Well, Mr. Clegg, I can answer that, being a fellow Californian of George Swenson, and there are a number of us transplanted Californians here. And you know why? We're here to get away from this very filth that has destroyed California. That's why a lot of us came here, because we came to a good, clean, basically Christian community with good social mores, with tasteful displays, and other things that we find completely missing now from California. So a lot of us came here looking for what California once was, I suppose, and instead we're met by Fair Pocatello, the so-called gay pride, LGBTQ, and we're hit in the face by a $156,000 campaign, mostly by outsiders, not by Pocatelloans, to overcome a possible repeal of this disgusting law. So why is it the homosexuals are up in arms? Because we've seen what happens to a community when they lose all moral values, when they lose all sense of direction, when their moral compass always points down. Those of us who have come here from California and other parts of the country, it's interesting how California becomes an epithet in the mouths of some who don't have any other expression. But in a nutshell, Mr. Clegg, that's a big reason why a lot of us are here. We came here for a better life, and unfortunately, what we're seeing is Pocatello slowly meandering toward a California lifestyle because of non-discrimination ordinance, because of letters like yours. Now, Mr. Clegg had decided he had a mea culpa. He decided perhaps that maybe he'd been a little rough on good old George, and so, not in the newspaper where he tried to defame Mr. Swenson, but on all-in-one blog spot from where I stand, he decided to take a different tact. And on August, let's see, he wrote his article. It was published on the 14th. However, he had two blogs, one on the 13th and one on the 14th. On the 13th, he wrote one called Speaking Up. It has often been said that if you tell a lie long enough, people will accept it as the truth. You're right, Mr. Clegg. The LGBTQ lie is being told big enough and long enough, and some people are starting to buy it. Yesterday, I sent a letter to the editor of the Idaho State Journal in response to an editorial in Sunday's paper where George Swenson wrote an inflammatory piece about Pocatello's non-discrimination ordinance. Most of his words were just sour grapes that the vote didn't go his way. But there was one assertion he made that I couldn't resist answering. I still believe that responding to argumentative words with other argumentative words is less effective way of resolving the issue. But in the case of blatant lies, I think it's better to shine the light on them and to show them as such. For those of you who don't get the journal, here's what I sent. It is not as compassionate as it should be. Now, I just read to you what he sent. Later that day, he did his mea culpa on the 14th. The letter was printed on the 14th. I guess it was sent on the 11th or 12th. It was published on the 14th. Then Trent Clegg does another post on August 14th titled, Fingers Pointing Back at Me. Now that I'm a couple of days removed from the anger that first inspired my recent letter to the editor, I'm keenly aware of how I could have better handled the situation. Instead of returning Mr. Swenson's unkind words and jibes, I had to go back and look at what are the unkind words and jibes. I didn't see any. I saw plenty in Mr. Clegg's, but I didn't see anything in George Swenson's. George Swenson basically just reported the facts and made his own summation, if you will. Instead of returning Mr. Swenson's unkind words and jibes, I should have focused purely on the facts. I should have outlined what was incorrect, that the ordinance only protects LGBT people, and presented the correct information that the ordinance protects all people. In this way, I would have neutralized the name-calling and still spoken the truth. I deeply regret giving in to my urge to be mean. I hope I can clean up the mess. And so by his own words, he wrote the article to be mean. But I'm still puzzled by his statement, and the LGBTQ, folks, let's face it, the LGBTQ lifestyle, the homosexual lifestyle is in itself a lie. It is a pale reflection of God's gift. It is a poor reflection of God's gift. It is prima facie a lie. It is unnatural by God's laws of nature. So for him to say he's going to correct lies, they start first with the LGBTQ mindset, in my opinion. So I'm a little surprised when, or not surprised, but I like it says, instead of returning Mr. Swenson's unkind words and jibes, I should have outlined what was incorrect and presented the correct information. Well, the correct information is that the non-discrimination ordinance was passed by one vote, Steve Brown's, who has political aspirations and probably feels that the LGBTQ community now owes him, and the liberal progressives at the university and School District 25 will support him, as they quite probably will, and I'm sure he will court that vote at every opportunity. And that in Mr. Trent's or Mr. Clegg's eyes, anything that is against that ordinance, anything that refutes the ordinance, is a lie. Sorry, Mr. Clegg, I can't see eye to eye on that one. All right. Didn't really want to go through all that, but I couldn't let the, you know, if there's going to be truth monitoring here, then let's have it on both sides. And let's face it, the LGBTQ people have tons of money, tons of assistance from the outside. They can say pretty much whatever they want to. The Idaho State Journal will print it for them. It probably even helps them with their grammar and spelling to make sure that it gets across. They get plenty of help on Channel 8. I rarely watch Channel 8 or Channel 6, but it seems like when I do watch Channel 8, and it's usually because somebody has said, Ralph, you need to go to YouTube and check this out. And Channel 8 is at it again, and it's usually young Mr. Cole presenting a story, an article, a news report that is usually in some way directly or indirectly supportive of the homosexual community, and he gets plenty of support from Channel 8, so I guess that they're going to be water boys for the program also. Well, all right, so moving on. August 15th. This was in the Idaho State Journal. Remember, as I've told you before, you don't have to buy the journal. I'm already paying for it. It's not tax deductible, I'm sorry to say. But, you know, I can read these things to you and save you the expense. Or you can go up to the Idaho, to the university. I understand that they dump a big pile of them up there, I guess, at the rendezvous every day, and so that the students can have the paper for free. I really don't know how that works. I'm just told that it does. But why pay for this? So this was an article in the Idaho State Journal. It was actually a column by Senator Mike Crapo on August 15th. Concerns with how far the federal government will go in collecting and storing private personal information are more than understandable. These concerns are validated when we see examples of federal agencies overstepping into our personal lives, such as a federal agency collecting and monitoring massive amounts of data on individuals' personal financial accounts. We must continue to watch the watchdogs and not allow the federal government to further encroach on our personal privacy. Helping to ensure the protection of our Second Amendment rights includes making certain that federal funding cannot be used for the establishment of firearms registries. Although current law prohibits the federal government from storing information acquired during the firearms background check process, there is nothing in place to keep federal funding from being used by non-federal entities to collect and store personally identifiable information related to the sale, purchase, or ownership of a firearm. The release of personal information of gun owners for inappropriate purposes is cause for concern. Storage of such information in so-called gun registries is simply an invasion of privacy for citizens lawfully practicing their constitutional right. It is essential that the federal government does not play a role in such activities, and the taxpayer resources are used in a manner that is consistent with federal policy. That is why I joined 14 fellow senators, including Senator Jim Risch of Idaho, in co-sponsoring Senate 2105, the Gun Owner Registration Information Protection Act, GRIP. They love these acronyms, GRIP. Get a grip. This legislation would reaffirm existing laws that bars the federal government from storing information acquired during the firearms background check process. The GRIP Act would also explicitly prohibit the use of any federal funding from being used to contribute to non-federal gun registries. The legislation does not include any limitations related to state record keeping for permitting law enforcement issued firearms or lost or stolen firearms. This one-sentence legislation would provide straightforward protection of our constitutional right. End quoting. And this is one sentence. It sounds like a paragraph. Quote, "No department or agency of the United States shall support by funding or other means the establishment or maintenance by a state or political subdivision of a state of any comprehensive or partial listing of firearms lawfully possessed or lawfully owned by private persons, or of persons who lawfully possess or own firearms, except in the case of firearms that have been reported to the state or political subdivision as lost or stolen." Unquote. The National Instant Check System, NICS, was established in 1998 as a reasonable measure to keep guns out of the hands of those who have a history of criminal behavior. Congress did not intend for it to become a method of developing a national gun registry or allowing the federal government to compile or assist in compiling files on law-abiding citizens. Congress has consistently pushed back against efforts to retain information gathered through the background checks or levy fees for the checks. Federal law requires the destruction of records on approved firearm sales within 24 hours. I will continue to support the protection offered citizens in the Constitution and minimize federal involvement in the lives of citizens. And this column was submitted by U.S. Senator Mike Crapo, Republican of Idaho Falls. As so often happens, I hope this doesn't get lost, but as long as the Dems rule the Senate, it'll probably get lost in the shuffle somewhere. Well, here's some good news. Going from the drab to the good news. Bannock County Republican women set luncheon with Senator Mike Crapo. This is from yesterday's Idaho State Journal. The Bannock County Republican women cordially invite all Republican women to come to a luncheon with Senator Mike Crapo on Thursday, August 28 at 1 p.m. in the Newberry building upstairs. There is an elevator. 150 North Main in Old Town Pocatello. Senator Crapo has expressed an interest in meeting the women of the Bannock County Republican women and learn of the many activities they support. This is a wonderful opportunity for more Republican women to meet our senator and to see how they can become involved in civic activities through the membership in the BCRW. The Bannock County Republican Women is an award-winning chapter of the National Republican Women. The BCRW has an annual Constitution Day camp in which hundreds of local children have learned how our country was founded. The BCRW also assists with the annual Constitution Essay Contest within our local schools and provide many teaching aids to local schools to help fulfill the federal mandate that Constitution Day, September 17th, be part of all schools' curriculums. The Bannock County Republican Women awards scholarship money to winning essayists. And they do great work. And I've told you about the Constitution Day Camp. We just had they had a very successful one this year. Over 60 kids had 1 week where they are immersed in the Constitution and learning about the founding of our nation, about our forefathers, and what it really took to build a great representative constitutional republic such as we enjoy here. Well, yesterday also, sadly, there was an obituary for retired Congressman Representative George V. Hansen. George V. Hansen, September 14th, 1930, August 14th, 2014. George Vernon Hansen of Pocatello, Idaho, left this life to be with his Heavenly Father on August 14th, 2014. George was embraced and surrounded by his family who cherished him. Their family is so happy to know that George and Connie are together again for time and all eternity. They were married over 60 years until Connie's passing on April 9th, 2013. I won't read the whole obituary. You can look it up. It was a very well-written obituary. I remind us that we have been very blessed in this community to have such men and women. His wife Connie was a dear woman. To have such wonderful people as George and Connie Hansen in our midst. George Hansen suffered terribly for the freedoms that you and I enjoy. He had a battle with the IRS, and for a while it looked like he was going to lose. He won, but he paid dearly for it after spending 15 months in prison, being subjected to freeway therapy where he never knew from day to day where he would be, so his family didn't know. To having his feet so badly abused that it basically crippled him for life. George was a true patriot, a true Republican representative, and I say that with this small r, and not the party r. He was a true representative of our representative constitutional republic. Connie was one of the most gracious and dearest ladies you will ever meet. They were a very, very good couple. They will be very much missed by many of us. God bless, and our condolences, our sincere and express sincere condolences go out to the family. I know that George and Connie will be missed. We were blessed to have them in our midst for a time. Now you may remember, this is kind of a step back in time here in our area. And I remember at the time I was puzzled by this thing, but let me just share this article now. This was actually from today's paper. All charges dropped against Putnam. This was written by the journal staff on the Idaho State Journal. A local speech pathologist and business owner who spoke out about her arrest in the spring of 2013 on a charge of misdemeanor second-degree stalking saw that and a subsequent charge dismissed during the past 2 months. With the charges against her now dropped, Jennifer Putnam said she's planning lawsuits against the city of Pocatello and its police, as well as Bannock County Jail where she was held. Quote, "The damage to my children, my store, my speech pathology business, and myself emotionally, physically with my multiple sclerosis, and financially would make any person be angry and sick that this kind of treatment would be allowed," Putnam said. "I begged both the lead city attorney, the mayor, the police chief, and the city council to take a look at what was happening to prevent a lawsuit against the city, and there was absolutely no response." Putnam first spoke out about the circumstances surrounding her arrest in May of last year, criticizing the Pocatello Police Department for requiring that she be interviewed at 10 p.m. in her home as she prepared for bed. The interview was part of the investigation into the incident, based on which she was eventually charged. A month later, she was charged with misdemeanor violation of a no-contact order after going to Portneuf Medical Center, the workplace of the alleged stalking victim, even though the no-contact order forbade Putnam, they said forbid, it forbade Putnam from knowingly going within 300 yards of the alleged victim's person, property, residence, workplace, or school. In June, 6th District Magistrate Rick Canaroli dismissed the second-degree stalking charge. A month later, he also dismissed the violation of a non-contact order charge. In his order dismissing the charge, Canaroli wrote that a charge of violating a no-contact order requires that there was contact between the person charged and the alleged victim. In other words, if you're not supposed to be there, then the only way to prove it is you go touch them, I guess, be near them. He wrote that while Putnam should not have been at PMC, the proper charge, because there was no contact between her and the alleged victim, should have been misdemeanor criminal contempt. Dismissal of this charge at this time will serve the ends of justice and the effective administration of the court's business, Canaroli wrote. Due to the potential for future litigation, Deputy City Attorney Rich Deal, who prosecuted the case against Putnam, declined to comment at this time. I don't know if you remember that. It sticks in my mind because I was very puzzled by the way the initial part of the investigation was conducted. I was puzzled as to why they would allow the patrol officer, who apparently knew the woman personally and had dealt with her before. I don't know if it was a police contact. I don't recall exactly, but apparently, as if I recall the article at the time, 10 o'clock at night, he went to her house and demanded to interview her. She asked if she could not come to the station the next day. She had children in the house. They said no, and I don't recall if they took her to the station. I think they did. I don't recall. But I thought it curious that first of all, they would allow this officer, who was personally involved to begin with, apparently, they would allow him to be the upfront investigator instead of having the detectives do the investigation. And why they would demand on a misdemeanor charge, certainly she was not a flight risk on this, she was certainly not going to leave town over it, not with her work and her children here, her business here, why they would demand that she go to the station at 10 o'clock at night, instead of citing her back and letting her go the very next morning. She said she would, and they said no. I'm sure there was some legitimate reason for it, but based on what I read in the Idaho State Journal, and I know I shouldn't put too much faith in that, but based on that, I was puzzled at the time. I'm puzzled still. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes for her. All right. This, too, was taken out of today's Idaho State Journal, simply in your letters, titled President Obama. President Obama's intention is to divide rather than lead. Anyone who has followed his tenure in office can see he failed Leadership 101 while excelling in community organizing. One word, change, best explains his actions. The hope is if he resigns. Nationally, he creates crisis after crisis, waits until they are overwhelming, then immediately demands action from a representative government that is intentionally designed to debate and resist one-man rule. Our Constitution divides governing responsibility into the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. In short, the president has the responsibility to enforce laws written by Congress that courts deem constitutional. The president cannot legally change the law. He, with the aid of Attorney General Eric Holder, neglects their responsibility of enforcement by choosing which laws to enforce. Without enforcement, laws fail to exist. In one word, both Eric Holder and Obama are lawless. Democrats defending these decisions are as lawless. Those riding shotgun during the bank robbery are as guilty as the one stealing the money. Obama's actions invited this current child illegal invasion, and his inaction is inviting more. He has deferred prosecution of illegals crossing the border by executive action. The first offense for an illegal crossing at our border is a misdemeanor violation and deportation. The second is a felony punishable by 4 years in a federal penitentiary. A failure to enforce has recently cost an off-duty border guard his life after being shot by an illegal during a robbery. The killer has been deported 4 times. In the eyes of the law, the president is not an accomplice to murder, but maybe he should be. Would Pocatello keep a police chief who refused to enforce laws? Just shameful. And this is written by Gene Waters. And Gene, well thought out, well said. Before I go in I've got one other short thing here, and we'll get into it. I want to tell you about a new book that I would very, very highly recommend to you. This is by Dr. Stephen M. Kirby. Now, by way of public disclosure, I know Stephen Kirby. We've been friends for 30, 35 years. He is a retired law enforcement officer. He has his doctorate in international law, I think it is. He is very much into the study of Islam and all of the stuff that's going on today. He's written, I believe, 3 books on the subject. This is his most recent. This book is called Islam, According to Muhammad, Not Your Neighbor, by Stephen M. Kirby. And I thought that was a great title. Excuse me. Dr. Kirby is the author of Letting Islam Be Islam, Separating Truth from Myth, a book that provides a very deep understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah, and is an excellent resource to guide you in understanding the enormous plethora of information about Islam. And that book is also available. He's done 3 books now, and this is his 3rd. Islam, According to Muhammad, Not Your Neighbor. I just got this in the mail today, and I started thumbing through it, and some very interesting sections in here. One of the things that puzzles a lot of Americans is Obama and the way he has been doing this whole war ever since he got in. First he went around the world apologizing for the United States. That was despicable on its own self. And then you remember the film clip of him bowing before the king of Saudi Arabia? His image was at a point you couldn't see where he was going. I suspect he probably kissed the Saudi king's hand. It wouldn't surprise me. But what he was doing was he was bowing to the defender of Islam and the I forget the whole title, but the king of Saudi Arabia is considered to be the central defense or protector for all of Islam. He is required to defend Messina and Medina. I don't know if he's required to defend Jerusalem, since that's 3rd of importance in those 3, but perhaps he is. But he is the defender of all things Islamic. And here we have our president bowing before him, before the eyes of Islam, before Muslims. He was subjecting himself to the authority of both the king and Islam. But I digress. There are a lot of Americans have said, wait a minute, he goes to this Christian church in Chicago, Christian by some definition, this Jeremiah Wright's church, the anti-white railer that calls himself a minister of the gospel. Well, yeah, he can go there, but you say, well, wait a minute, he's a Christian. And then a lot of people say, he acts like a Muslim. He wears a ring that has the Muslim symbols on it. He has never had a prayer breakfast in the traditional sense for Christians, but he's had he always defers to Islam for Ramadan and all that. In fact, during the month of Ramadan recently, if you notice this, and it was just brought to my attention recently, he was not wearing his ring or his watch during Ramadan. And as I understand, during Ramadan, you are not to adorn yourself in any way. So maybe, it's suspect. It's not necessarily the evil, but certainly the appearance of evil. And our good president has given many a lot to think about. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, because I have told you before, and I always tell you, don't just don't take Ralph Lillig's word for it. Check it out. Check me out. I try to give you the truth if I can find it. If I can't defend it in some way, I won't say it. But there's some very interesting chapters in this book. And one that came out as I was thumbing through this, Islam teaches personal deception. And it explains right in here, this is page 134, chapter 13. It explains how the Quran, how Islam instructs those those Muslims who for whatever reason don't want to be known as Muslims, say Barack Obama, with, as he put it, this strange sounding name, Barack Hussein Obama. It explains how you are not only allowed to, you are encouraged to lie about your status as a Muslim in order to deliberately deceive the infidel. That's you and me. You are allowed to do that whenever you feel like you're outnumbered, whenever you don't want for any reason for people to know. So theoretically speaking, looking at the actions of our alleged president over the last 5.5 years, 6 years, whatever, and the many instances where he has appeared directly and indirectly to side with the Islamists, to side with Islam, to soft pedal the jihad and all this stuff, many of us have said, this guy's a Muslim. And of course the news says, oh, he's not a Muslim, he's a Christian. Why, he goes to Jeremiah Wright's church up there in Chicago, and everybody knows he's a Christian. Really? Well, if you wondered how a Muslim who believes in Islam and believes in whatever, how he could get away with saying that, this is a very good chapter in this book. Islam teaches personal deception. I'll read this quickly, just a little bit of it. I'm not going to read the whole thing, we don't have the time. But it's an interesting chapter. There are 2 specific verses in the Quran that allow individual Muslims to deceive non-Muslims if the circumstances demand it. The first verse, Surah 3:28, allows Muslims to pretend to be friends with non-Muslims, even though there are many verses in the Quran prohibiting such friendship. The second verse, verse 16:106, allows Muslims to publicly renounce Islam, even though Muhammad said that anyone leaving Islam should be killed. Then he goes through and explains that. So think about that. They can deny it, or in the case of the president and his apologist, they can renounce it. Well, how can you say that? He's not a Muslim. Then it goes through raping female captives, beheading. Now this is big right now. We saw this, the latest insult to humanity that happened by the ISIS or ISIL, however they're calling themselves, where this young man was beheaded on television. It's on YouTube, and I would suggest you not go look at it. If you've seen one beheading, you've seen all you ever have to see, and you'll never need to see another one. I suggest you don't put it into your mind. It's a horrible thing to watch. The Islamists have no problem with beheading babies, children, cutting them in half. Now they've beheaded recently this reporter. So in this book, Islam According to Muhammad, Not Your Neighbor, by Dr. Stephen M. Kirby, there are chapters on raping female captives, beheading, redefining jihad. The word jihad, as I understand it in Arabic, simply means struggle. And if you are a purist, if a Muslim is a purist, it can mean military jihad, or it can simply mean a struggle with your own walk, with your own Islamic walk with Allah or whatever. Mistreatment and torture of captives, killing of infants, killing of non-combatant women and children, a return to Islam, religion of peace. It's an easy read. It's very well put together. There are plenty of references that you can check out on this, so you can make sure that don't trust Dr. Kirby either. Always check out the sources yourself. But this is a very good book that I highly recommend to you. And I'm only getting into it. I've spot read these very things that you see the yellow tabs on them. I spot read them because I got this late this afternoon when the mail showed up about 3:30. And it's easy enough that I was able to spot check these sections and get a good feel of how useful you would find this. Now, why do I share this with you? Well, I just learned, now remember I shared with you that I had been told there are 500 Middle Eastern students at our university. Most of them, I guess, are studying engineering. Excuse me. And I thought 500 was an extreme number. Well, I was told yesterday by a pretty reliable source that there were somewhere, and it's hard to get the numbers, there's somewhere between 800 and 1,000 Middle Eastern students here. Now, why do I share that with you? Well, in military terms, 1,000 men is basically a brigade or a battalion, depending if you're talking about Army or Marine Corps. 1,000. Now, what are the ISIS people? The ISIS people have been laying low for many years, but all the stuff that we're seeing now has been planned for many years. The ISIS soldiers are young men. They have made it very clear that they plan to plant the black flag of the Caliphate on the White House, on the top of the White House. They have made it very clear that their mission in life is to establish an international caliphate, a one world caliphate, and to first of all kill all the Jews and Christians. And they kill other Muslims. Make no doubt about it. There are 72 or 73 sects of Islam. The two most prominent are the Sunnis. They are about 85%, I think, and the Shia, which are somewhere around 15 or 17%. They both have the Quran that they can lay back on to kill us. ISIS is the most extreme part of this very extreme religion. With 1,000 young Muslims at our university, if they were in any way encouraged by Islam or by ISIS or ISIL or Al-Qaeda or anybody else to go on a rampage in this city, there would be little we could do. There would be little we could do to defend this city against 1,000 really meaning, people, Islamic extremists who meant business. Give that some thought. The foxes are perhaps in the hen house. Another book I would suggest you read, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam. I've told you about this one many times. The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades. Oftentimes you hear the extreme Islamists talking about the Crusaders. Infidels, Christians in this case, are called the Crusaders. It is meant as derisively, it is meant angrily, it is meant against those of us who subscribe to the Christian faith. The Jews were not considered to be part of the Crusaders, but according to Islam, the Jews must be killed anyway. So, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades. Islam, according to Muhammad, Not Your Neighbor, and I think that's a very good title because people have a lot of confusion because of the way the press has portrayed Islam and all of the stuff that's going on. And you wonder from day to day, well, what's the truth? Are they really bad? Has Islam been hijacked? Well, I can tell you this, my friend. If you read Islam according to Muhammad, Not Your Neighbor, you will find that Islam has not been hijacked. It is being fulfilled. And that's the simple case of it, is being fulfilled, not hijacked. Then there are other books that I've shared with you before. One that I haven't talked a whole lot about, you might like, God's Battalions, The Case for the Crusaders by Rodney Stark. God's Battalions, The Case for the Crusaders. The very first book I read when I started getting into Islam and trying to find out how in the world can a religion portraying itself as peaceful be so evil? And that's the only way I could see it because of the things were happening. So the very first book I read was Unveiling Islam. It's an insider look at Islam as Muslim life and beliefs. Unveiling Islam, and you can't miss it. The title has this lady with beautiful eyes on the front of this. They really catch your attention. Unveiling Islam. It's a very easy read. Another one I would suggest to you, especially if you're a Christian, Antichrist, Islam's Awaited Messiah. Antichrist, Islam's Awaited Messiah. Well, that's pretty much it for this week. Didn't get to cover as much as I wanted to, but I did get to tell you about these books. I do hope you'll take advantage of them. I will tell you these titles again next week perhaps, because I think it's extraordinarily important at this age and the things that are happening in this world. You need to know what is in store for us if we don't wake up. In the meantime, I hope you'll join us again next week. God bless you and yours. Pray for Israel. They need our prayers. Pray for our nation. We need our prayers. Pray for your family. We'll see you next week. God bless you. Good night.